Well, hello and welcome to the Monday Reflection on this sunny but slightly breezy, windy day. How are you doing? I hope you're okay. We're now into week 5 of lockdown. How are you coping with that? Are you struggling or are you doing okay? We're all in the same boat, aren't we? And I think the encouragement for us during this season is to not waste the time that we have, and to make the most of this season to grow in the Lord, to spend time reading His Word in prayer, and to encourage one another as well. That's really important, to make the effort to encourage one another. And it was great yesterday to be encouraged as we gathered for online church and to hear from a number of people around the fellowship. And that was really encouraging to be a part of. Hopefully you were able to join with us. If you weren't, then the Sunday service is still there for you to engage with on the YouTube channel. Well, thinking of encouraging one another, last week on the Monday Reflection, I said to you, if you could send me a video sharing a Bible verse and just sharing briefly why that verse has been an encouragement to you in your walk with the Lord. And I want us to watch this one, which Clint sent into me this past week. So let's watch this together.
Hello everyone. I've been asked to talk about my favorite verse in the Bible, something that I find very difficult because there's so many. But I'm going to talk about Hebrews chapter 12 verse 2, which says, "Let us keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, on whom our faith depends from beginning to end. He did not give up because of the cross. On the contrary, because of the joy that was waiting for him, he thought nothing of the disgrace of dying on the cross, and he is now seated on the right-hand side of God's throne." That verse gives me comfort because the first part talks about us fixing our eyes on Jesus. And really and truly, that's what we all need to do, to just fix our eyes on Jesus, because in his time, he will make all things beautiful. And during our lockdown and the uncertainties, what better way than to fix our eyes on Jesus, to talk to him, to pray to him, and he knows he is in control. So let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our lives. And as a child, I've always used that verse when things are really looking uncertain. So let us all fix our eyes on Jesus. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Clint. And it's really helpful to rightly be reminded that to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus is the primary focus for us during this season, during every season. If you feel you could send me a video sharing a verse and why it's been encouraging to you, that would be really good, because it will encourage not just me, but encourage all who watch this video. And it's good to see familiar faces, isn't it, from around the fellowship. So the details of how you can send that to me will appear on the screen as if by magic in a moment. Well, I don't know what kind of house you live in, or maybe you live in a flat. Is it a modern house or is it an old house? We've, since we've been married, lived in a modern house. We now live in a house that is fairly old, and we know that because when we walk across our landing, a number of the floorboards creak. Now, if you live in a modern house, you won't be familiar with that. But if you're in an older house, you probably will be familiar with that too. There's certain parts of the floor where you put your foot, you put your weight, and there's a creaking sound. Well, on another note, a few weeks back, Laura and I were sitting downstairs in our house, watching TV or reading, I can't remember, and we were there, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, there was a mighty crash from upstairs in our house. Quite a loud crash. It wasn't just something that just toppled over. It was fairly loud. And I was a bit scared actually that perhaps the roof had collapsed or something. But I went cautiously upstairs to find out what this mighty crash was. And as I came in here, which is our spare room and doubles up as a study space for me, as I came in here, this shelf, which you can just see here, had completely fallen off the wall, and the contents of the shelf, which was a lot more than is on there now, had completely gone everywhere, all over the floor. Well, in Romans 8, which is the verse I just want us to reflect on today on the Monday reflection, in Romans 8 from verse 18, Paul speaks about creation, the creation creaking. It is under a bondage or a decay. It's a bit broken, a bit like our shelf was a couple of weeks back. And he goes on to say that whilst creation groans and is creaking and is broken, we too, as humans, groan. And we groan as believers as we await the redemption or the rescue, the salvation of our bodies. That's what he says in verse 23. In other words, we live in this broken world and we feel the effects of brokenness. And in fact, the brokenness that we feel is directly our fault, because we can trace it back to Genesis 3, where the first man and woman rebelled against God and said no thanks to God and his rule and his way. They didn't want God's rule over their lives. And from that point on, decay set in to creation. And from that point on, as humanity, we have attempted to pretty much run the world on our terms, to run it as we want for our gain and without God, eliminating God from the equation, trying to create ultimately our own version of paradise, but minus God. And there's a big problem there. If we try and create what we think is paradise without God, is going to fail miserably. And we've been reminded dramatically of that recently through our present circumstances with this coronavirus pandemic going all around the world. We've been reminded that this is a world which is creaking and a world which is broken. And also we've been reminded that there's no paradise to be enjoyed on this earth without God. We cannot know paradise created by ourselves here minus God. But the question is this then a hopeless existence? Is this life a hopeless one? Well, not at all. Here's another question for you. Have you ever been fruit picking? I'm sure you have been gone picking fruit at some point. We used to, when I was younger, we used to go regularly to pick strawberries at the right time of year when they were fresh and ready to pick, and we would go and get the basket and you would go around and pick the strawberries, and at the end you pay for them. And I'm not sure if you were supposed to do this, but part of the experience was going around and picking the strawberries, and you put some in the basket, but you'd also eat some as well on the way round. It's like the first taste of those strawberries as you were going around. But actually, they were so much more glorious when you got them home and they'd been washed and prepared, and then you enjoyed them with cream or with ice cream or something great like that. Well, the good news is, says Paul in this passage in Romans 8, that we've been given the Holy Spirit as a first fruit. That's how Paul describes it in Romans 8. Well, the Spirit is like a taste of things to come. After Christ had died, was buried, rose again, he ascended back to heaven. We just celebrated Easter a week or so back, and we're told at the end of Luke and also at the beginning of Acts how Christ then ascended back to be with his Father in heaven. And as he did that, he promised his Holy Spirit to his people, the church, his Spirit to equip and to empower us as the people of God, and to help us, says Paul in verse 26, to help us in our weakness. The Spirit of God equips us, shapes us as we navigate our way through this broken world. The Spirit of God gives us a taste of all the wonderful things that are to come, the glories of a new earth, which is described at the end of the Bible when Jesus returns, when he comes back. And the Spirit reminds us or gives us a taste that we belong to Jesus, and that this life, this present life, is not our final destination. For some of you, hopefully some of you have got a garden, and if you do, I bet you're quite grateful for your garden at this present time where we can't just go out and about, but just the privilege, the blessing of being able to step outside into the garden is a good one right now. Well, we as Christians live between two gardens, the Garden of Eden at one end of the spectrum, where everything went wrong, where decay set in because of our rebellion against God. And yet there's the Garden City at the other end of the spectrum, or the new earth, which is described in Revelation, where everything is made right. Garden of Eden, where it all went wrong. And then at this end, the new earth, where everything is made right. And that was made possible and is available to those who trust in Jesus alone to rescue and to save. Presently, we live in a broken, groaning, creaking world, but God has given us his Spirit, and we should be encouraged by that taste of things to come, that the Spirit of Jesus lives in those who believe, who trust in him. We have a taste of things to come, and God has given us of his Spirit to equip us and empower us through our weakness to live for him. We have that promise that Christ is returning. That's what it says at the beginning of Acts 1 verse 11. The angel says, "Why do you stand here looking into the sky?" just after Jesus had ascended into heaven, because the same Jesus who had been taken into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go. We can live in light of that glorious hope and future. Though the cracks and breaks in this world are very evident, we can be full of hope. And we'll be thinking more about that on Sunday as we explore this passage in more detail. So do join us on Sunday for our online service. Well, have a good week, and may God bless you in all you do.